Chuck Olsen.
Nice to meet you, sir.
Yeah.
You are good, sir.
Okay. Congressman, thanks for speaking with us. We know the politics here in Madison, but what emotional
The attempt to crush what should really be a basic right of workers without question, and that is the right to collective bargaining. And the form of aggression that was used against workers, I think, was so offensive to people in Wisconsin and across the country.
We've been told that the labor movement has been somewhat nascent or quiet for a few decades. Why is that so?
Well, look at NAFTA. Look what NAFTA did. I mean, NAFTA was responsible for moving millions of jobs out of this country. That with China trade really created a condition where workers were much more vulnerable in the non-public unions. But you had the right to organize really dealt a devastating blow with NAFTA because people could move their jobs to places where workers didn't have any rights at all, and where there were no prohibitions on child labor and slave labor and prison labor, and where the water and the air could be ruined by corporations in another place. And so they put the pressure on environmental laws here in the States. So that NAFTA was a devastating blow to workers. That, plus some efforts at privatization at various levels of government, even in the Congress. I mean, I fought a 7-year battle against a group that was trying to privatize jobs in the Defense Finance Administration. Finally reversed it after 7 years by proving that the privatization was extraordinarily expensive to the taxpayers, as all privatizations are. So it's been a tough period. Plus, you've had the Democrats promise to have an Employee Free Choice Act if we won the Congress and the presidency. And as soon as we took power, the Democrats, didn't do it. And that's the same Democratic Party that promised in 2006 to end the war in Iraq if they were given a congressional majority. Didn't do it. So people just, kind of get, the political system isn't really working for us, and wages are getting knocked down, and corporations are gaining more power. So workers have basically been ducking, hoping that they're not going to get hurt. Now, Wisconsin is fired up, which can only be good for the country.
Right. We saw signs in weeks past in the Wisconsin State Capitol for Obama to come to Madison.
Well, he should be here. I mean, where is he? He's made a statement. He's standing behind workers. He should be standing in front of them. He's the president. Lead. Show people that you're dedicated to workers' rights. There's a line that you can't serve two masters. And I think that our president has heavy pressure on him from Wall Street right now. There's too many Wall Street types running the country. Too many in the cabinet. Too many of influence. And I think that that's reflected in his reticence about showing up with large groups of people who are protesting a corporate groupthink, which translates itself into state policy.
The similar legislation was passed in Ohio, your home state. Worse, because it did not exempt police and firefighters.
And the Ohio legislation not only forbids strikes, but if workers strike, it opens the door to replacement workers and also privatization, which is an ongoing constant factor. The governor is already talking about privatizing the turnpikes, privatizing the lottery. Before too long, they'll be selling off everything that isn't nailed down, and they'll be getting crowbars to try to sell the things that are nailed down. We have a real problem where there's an attempt to strip the wealth of the nation.
How do we switch the narrative?
It's being switched.
It is. I mean, of course, the recession is not the fault of the workers; it's the fault of corporate practice and Wall Street. I mean, how do we end the war?
Yeah, I think with 50 million people without any health care, with 10 million people at least having lost their homes, with the retirement security of so many in jeopardy, with at least 9% of Americans, if not more, out of work. The narrative's getting changed by virtue of the fact that the system is collapsing. The government's being turned into an efficient engine to accelerate the wealth of America upwards. And as people come into an awareness of that, they take to the streets. And it's not only what Scott Walker is doing in Wisconsin and what John Kasich is doing in Ohio and the governor of Michigan is doing. It's the whole national climate where people are just rebelling against it. And there's a revolt underway. And the same tide that struck the Republicans into power is going to come back. But whether it comes back in the direction of bringing Democrats back depends on whether the Democrats actually have anything to say that's relevant. That's always a challenge in our party. Other than to say we're not Republicans. It's not enough to say you're not Republican. It's enough to say jobs for all, health care for all, education for all, retirement security for all, peace. We need that's the narrative that will strike a responsive chord in people's hearts. But if it's just some kind of political pablum about, Republicans aren't providing jobs. Okay, well, what did we do?
A Democrat in the White House and yet no end in sight for Afghanistan. How does that change?
No, worse than that. The war is getting extended. That we know. The war is getting elongated.
How does that change your push for the Department of Peace?
Well, it intensifies it. It also intensifies the efforts to try to end these wars. President Obama promised to end these wars. He went along with General Petraeus' surge. And frankly, I have to be convinced that the Pentagon isn't in control of our policies. So we're stuck in there until the public rises up in the same way they're rising up outside of state capitals. They may have to come to Washington to say, look, we're fed up with your wars. Because when you think about it, President Obama was supposed to bring real change. He could have ended the war in Iraq. He didn't. Somebody says, well, he's ended the war, he ended combat. Look, 50,000 troops, you're either in or you're out. I'm sorry. This is starting to sound like a Katy Perry song. And I think that it's the lack of will to bring an end to the war, the wars, the lack of will to end the national security state. The lack of will to take on the Pentagon, not by some silly cut of $60 billion over, X number of years. Look, half of that budget could be cut. It's all based on propagating war. We have to really decide who we are as a nation. And if we're going to keep spending money for the Pentagon, if they're going to take over 50% of discretionary spending in the budget, if they're going to push the president to continue to prosecute wars, then we're in for massive poverty in this country. And so we have to get control of that and really take a stand for peace, because peace is practical. If you ever want to understand the impracticality of war, we're going to spend $3 trillion on a war based on lies, Iraq. And we will spend trillions of dollars on a war that's based on an abysmal reading of history in Afghanistan. And the difficulty we're having in ending these wars is we're not calling to an account George Bush, Dick Cheney, Don Rumsfeld for taking us into wars based on lies. If there's any justice in the world, they should be in the dock at The Hague for war crimes, because they took this nation into a war based on lies, resulting in the deaths of thousands of American servicemen, tens of thousands injured for life, $3 trillion at least in taxpayers' money being wasted, over 1 million dead Iraqis. What for? Just for a lie. There has to be accountability. And you don't get accountability writing bestsellers.
Thank you for your time, Congressman.
Thank you, sir.
Any final thoughts for online viewers?
Or independent media?
Well, let me turn it over.
Thank you.
Thanks.